Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, I want to get some business items out of the way. Please feel free to share this on Facebook Live if you can. It's being streamed live from the Latin American Relief Fund's Facebook page. So please share that widely with your friends. I also want to let people know that this meeting is being recorded in case you'd like to know that. Anyway, and on with our meeting. I'm Judith Jill, President of the Board of the Latin American Relief Fund. And we at LARF are excited to have Joshua Rubin, founder of Witness at the Border, in conversation with documentary filmmaker Victoria Bruce today. Since 2018, Witness at the Border has been bearing witness at child and family incarceration centers in Tornillo, Texas, Homestead, Florida, Brownsville, and most recently, El Paso, Texas. They track ICE flights, witness expulsions, deportation, prisoner transfers, and report on what's happening in real time along the US-Mexico border. We're hoping Josh can share some of the more current things that are happening at the border, as I'm sure all of you are as disappointed as I am about the Biden administration's response to the immigration crisis. Victoria Bruce is a documentary filmmaker who is currently working on a project called Las Abogadas. It follows a really diverse group of women immigration attorneys and their fight for justice for asylum seekers in the United States. After the presentation, we will take a few questions. If you'd like to put them in the chat, that would be great. And I think I'll just hand it over to Victoria from here, who will be interviewing Josh for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate what the Latin American Relief Fund does. I got to be up close and personal to the work that you do at the ABBA shelter in Celaya, and it's really phenomenal. The things that Pastor Ignacio is able to do because of the funding of the people that support your organization. So I really appreciate being here. And I really appreciate being here with Joshua Rubin. Thank you for joining us, Joshua, too. This is my second time I've had the great fortune to interview Mr. Rubin. I really, to me, as a documentary filmmaker, you come across a lot of very exceptional people. And Joshua stands very high on my list of exceptional people in the space of witnessing this crisis that's going on right now, that has been going on for a long time. So when I first met Josh, it was, let's see, it would have been right before COVID. It was February 2020. And I remember it well because we were in the midst of the migrant protection protocols, or what people refer to as the migrant persecution protocols. And it was the first time I went to film for my film. And I saw Josh and one of his colleagues and some other people were really witnessing. I mean, when it says witness at the border, they mean witness at the border. They were right in front of the border from Matamoros into Brownsville, Texas, every day, being there and putting a face to what was happening down there. So that at that point, I had come to film Charlene de Cruz, who's a lawyer with Project Corazon and Lawyers for Good Government. And she was barely squeezing out one asylum seeker at a time with so much fancy footwork, and was talking with Josh and his colleagues, and everybody was helping each other. But literally the pipeline had just come to a complete stop almost. So Charlene would identify people that had some kind of medical emergency, and then she would do seemed like thousands of hours of research with colleagues like Rebecca Eichler, who is part of the Latin American Relief Fund that we're raising money for today. And so Joshua, I remember talking to you at that time and talking to you about what you were doing. We were sort of sinking into despair because of the Trump administration. So today's talk is going to be about what kind of despair are we in now? What have you seen and what can we do about it? So I'm just going to turn the floor over to you to give us a little synopsis of from February 2020 to now, what have you seen at witnessing at the border?
We unfortunately, I think probably everybody's aware of the fact that fewer changes have taken place than we hoped for, but we have learned an important lesson, I think. The policies are very similar. We don't have MPP at the moment, although the Biden administration is rumored to be bringing it back fairly soon. They were ordered by a court to do so. And while they have the choice to write a new memo to explain why they don't want to do remain in Mexico, it doesn't appear that they're writing that memo. So we don't really know. I guess I came across an article yesterday that talked about Congressman Cuellar is promising that MPP will go back into effect. The reason it might go back into effect is because there's this other way of keeping people from coming across the border. And it's the use of Title 42, which is a kind of an excuse that was invented by Stephen Miller under the Trump administration to stop people at the border without even asking them why they're coming. In other words, not even giving them a chance to explain why they need asylum at the border. The Biden administration, I think most of us expected the Biden administration to lift that, and there were rumors to that effect a couple of times. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that they're delaying that. But under the pressure of the fact that Title 42 is an excuse, it uses COVID as an excuse for shortcutting people's rights like this way. As COVID lightens up, the excuse may be even thinner, which may explain why MPP may come back and we may find ourselves camped at the foot of that bridge where we met, Vicki. We've learned this. The policy concerning immigration at the border is not something that Trump came up with all by himself. And he was very flamboyant about his anti-immigrant rhetoric. With his anti-immigrant rhetoric, he was very cruel. But the policy has been the same, and it's been the same for quite some time. And that is the way we approach it is to try to disincentivize migration, one way or another. People come to the border, we try and make it hard for them. I mean, just think about the fact, I was discussing this with somebody earlier today. Think about the fact that when asylum seekers come to present themselves for asylum, they're put in detention as if they were criminals, when all they are doing is actually following law, our own law and international law. We put them in jail. That discourages people from coming to the border. It doesn't discourage them enough, as we've seen, because the places that they're leaving and the situations that they're leaving are more dire, and they do have hope. People are cursed with having hope, and they come to the border with that curse, and will put up with all kinds of misery in order to perpetuate that chance, that small chance that they're going to get to cross the border. So what's the difference between Biden and Trump? There are a couple of real differences. One real difference is I believe that his policy is a little bit more lenient on people that are already here. But as far as people coming to the border, I think it is just as cruel and rather frighteningly efficient. In a talk the other day with some of the people in my group, we came to the conclusion that Biden is the man who made the immigration planes run on time. He's efficient, and the airlift of the Haitian migrants who came to the border and were under the bridge in Del Rio was a remarkable act of efficiency. So politically, what are they trying to do? I think, and this is really kind of where the inspiration for my group comes in. I think that what Biden wants to do is hide, and what our immigration policy wants to do. It wants to disincentivize migration, and it wants to hide the fact of what we're doing. It wants it not seen. And that's why the scene in Del Rio was so embarrassing to the Biden administration, and the Border Patrol people riding around with lariats on horses and running down people. And that's why they got in there and in a remarkable airlift, in a few days' time, managed to expel and fly back to Port-au-Prince and Cap-Haitien, nearly 8,000 Haitians. Flew them back to a place where they are subject to kidnap, subject to rape, subject to theft, subject to assault. This is the situation that we saw when we were there, Vicky, in Brownsville, Matamoros, where people were being sent to stay in a camp across the bridge that could not be kept safe. Matamoros, rated by our State Department, is one of the most dangerous places on earth. I can't imagine what rating they could possibly give to Haiti at this point. The place cannot support more life. It can't support the life that it has there. And people are desperate to leave, and they're getting on boats, and they're floating away, and they're going to South America, and they're crossing the Darien Gap. And their money's being taken from them, and they're being raped and attacked. What's changed under the Biden administration? One of the things that's happened is the change in rhetoric. You'll notice anytime that they speak about their immigration policy, they will throw in the word humanitarian. That is not a word that Trump ever used or anybody in his administration ever used. But the word is only a word if it's not actually applied, if it's not something that's felt and done. This is not humanitarian. The situation at the border will continue this way. No matter what we do to disincentivize the flow of humanity that comes from the global South, from the Caribbean, from Latin America, from Africa, whatever we do, we will not stop it. The only question is, how much suffering are we going to inflict on the people who will have to move? We're sitting here and watching a tidal wave coming our way. The tidal wave of climate change, the droughts that are making land impossible for producing food in Central America. You know, first we destroyed their ability to feed themselves by moving plantations in there and moving them off their land. And now the entire world is conspiring to burn up that soil. They're not going to be able to farm it. They're going to come. And the question is, how many will drop along the way and how much suffering on their way? Our policy stays the same. It doesn't get any bigger. It doesn't bring us to a higher place where we can look down and actually see what's happening to our earth and see what's happening to the people that we're talking about.
Well, can I interrupt you? I want to continue down this path because I had the chance to go witness what you're talking about on the south side of the border in Tijuana a few months ago. Mm-hmm. Let's say I had been to the Matamoros camp, as you mentioned, and I had been to Tijuana in February of 2020 or March of 2020, right before COVID as well. What I found in June of 2021 was something so catastrophic that I was, as a documentary filmmaker, been in a lot of situations. I'm just scarred from what I saw to this day. And to me, it was like the whole world had turned their back on this scar, this festering wound of humanity, where 2,000 people, babies, grandparents in tents back to back being attacked. This is where I first met a lot of Haitian immigrants, and absolutely no one helping, right? No Mexican government, no US government, no Red Cross, no international aid, just a completely ignored catastrophic humanitarian crisis. And why is that? Why is there so little attention? Why between a very wealthy country and a country that has plenty of resources, although serious problems, but how can this be? How can we, I mean, it's so huge and catastrophic. And yet, like you said, we're hiding it, but we're hiding an enormous problem. And what of people suffering, I mean, I'm talking no toilets, no food. People would come with sandwiches and fights would break out. The Haitians were being stabbed with machetes because they didn't want the Black immigrants in this camp. I mean, it was, you can't even describe it. It was so bad. No one's helping. There's no, organizational help.
No, there's no organizational help, and there's a limit to what organizational help can do if we don't change our policy, if we don't actually look at the world in a different way. You're right. We don't see it, and that is the strategy. It's a very important strategy, which is why our group talks about witnessing. We don't know what to do. I mean, the frustration, the desperation we feel, and obviously it was in your voice there as you spoke about it, is what we feel, and what the only conclusion we come to is that we have to see it, and maybe if we see it, lead others to see it too. And that may change hearts, that may change minds, that may give the kind of perspective we need. But we started by looking at child detention, a particular place, Tornillo in the desert. And then when you start thinking about the problem that led to that, it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger until you realize that what's wrong at Tornillo is what's wrong not with our immigration system only, but with the world altogether. It's what's wrong with the world, that there are such things as borders that keep people from crossing from where they can't live to where they can. That's not something that is going to change. There's everything we can do. I mean, obviously, everything we can do, everything the organization that's sponsoring this can do to save a soul here or there is incredibly important. It has to be done. But we're not going to change the situation until we realize that humanity is one thing and that humanity is facing a cataclysm. And that it's just not going to change. The kind of resources that the people that we're talking about need are in the hands of what, 50 or 100 people in the world? How can we think about solving this problem when we can't even talk about such issues as that?
In a way, do you believe, first of all, I want to put another plug in for LARF because as Joshua
Please.
said, a little, any funding that LARF is doing, like, I feel the same way, Josh. Like, I have made so many good friends that are migrants, that are asylum seekers, and being able to touch lives one-to-one, that's what LARF is doing. And there's a link in the chat box here. And I'm going to ask Rebecca if you can also put it on the Facebook Live comment section so that people know that just, any help that you can give to one person, you're changing their whole entire world. So as sad and as depressed as you can get, seeing the big picture, there's so many ways to help. And so LARF is doing that. And I want to thank them for that. I want to say, it's sort of infuriating about, in a way, Trump being in office, really galvanized Democratic groups. Let's say if it was the Latin American caucus or the Latino caucus, I'm not sure what it's called, or the Black caucus, Congress people to come down and do something. I've seen almost none of that happening. Maybe there are. Can you talk about lawmakers currently that are willing to stand up to the Biden administration and say what you're doing is wrong? Is there anyone that we can ally with and call out our own Congress people? Will that do anything?
I wish I could answer that question. Obviously there are people out there that are very, very conscious of things like this. You know, there are good people. I'm not going to start naming them, but there are good people, but they have priorities and they have politics to think about. And I don't think, you know, from my perspective, I don't think that's the way to go. Even I want to go back to what the point that you brought up about when Trump was in office, you had all these people coming down. It does seem to me that immigration became a much more important issue when it could be used to bludgeon Trump. It's not that high on the agenda now that Biden is in office, and there's a real reluctance to call him out on what he's doing, even though his positions are very, very traditional and are along the lines of, you know, the paths laid by the Clinton administration to basically criminalize and disincentivize immigration, and to a certain extent kind of vilify them as people who are threatening our economy. We all know that that's not true, but it's a useful position. So we don't see the same kind of willingness to go down and call them out. It was a wedge against Trump, and now, you know, as if it weren't bad enough the way we're treating people who come to our border, we use them in order to beat Trump up, and now we're forgetting them. Now we are neglecting them. Now it's not as big an issue. Now there are other things that we have to take care of. We have to take care of first. So we've been, you know, the plight of people coming to our border is definitely sunk down somewhat. So what, you know, I know that I sound like I'm saying that this is hopeless. It is quite hopeless, but there are things that we have to do anyway. And like you say, we have to help people along the way. You know, there's the story of the starfish, right? The mother and child walking along and the boy throwing one starfish and another starfish, even though they're all over the beach. And, you know, she says, you know, look at all the starfish, you're not going to save them all. And he says, yeah, well, save that one. So organizations like this one are doing that kind of work. Charlene de Cruz on that bridge. We'd go up there with her and watch her argue and cajole and persist to get one sick baby across that bridge. We'd go stand there with her for hours to do that. She'd do the work, we'd watch her, we'd report on what she was doing. And at the end of a long, long day, sometimes a starfish. We have to do those things. We also have to watch, because that's their strategy. Their winning strategy is to keep us from seeing, which is why documentary filmmaking is so important, and why standing there and looking and talking and getting it back. And you know, because you've been there, it's not even the same to see it on film or in a photograph. You have to go. You have to see it. If we could bring everybody down to that border and march them across the bridge into Reynosa or Tijuana or all the other camps that are going to form the minute MPP starts again, maybe we could change something. But we have to see. We have to look, and in some way change the soul of a nation, change the soul of a world.
Talk a little bit about the most recent developments with, I know your organization had a live stream that I was actually on another call right before this about what ICE has been doing and the Border Patrol and some human rights abuses against Cameroonian deportees. Also, we mentioned Title 42 before as, you know, I think Alejandra Mayorkas is going back and forth and trying to say, oh, the CDC says we have to use Title 42 to keep us safe. Talk a little bit more about how legally that the Biden administration is arguing for these inhuman and basically illegal deportations, especially the Cameroonians about a year ago, and now the Haitians. Just, is that really Title 42? Is that what they're basing, just throwing people back without any due process?
Yes, they are. Let me briefly talk about the situation with the Cameroonians. You know, when we were in Brownsville, one of the things that happened to us is somebody let us know, I think it was Debbie Nathan, that there were deportation flights going out of Brownsville Airport. And so, you know, we were in Brownsville all day, very early in the morning. That's when the flights would go. So we'd get up at 4 in the morning and we'd go to the airport. And for the first time, we saw people arriving on buses, men, women, and children, sometimes in shackles, being marched up onto planes that, you know, that were deportation flights. These were people being flown out of the country. And we watched that. We learned that there are ways using the internet to track these flights, to see where they're going, to predict when they're going to happen, and what airports they were going out of, and what airlines were doing it. And it got to the point where within our group, we developed an expertise that enables us to be the best source of information now for ICE Air. ICE Air is a group name for a number of different airlines that are chartered in order to move detainees around for the purpose of expelling them or deporting them, which sounds an awful lot like the same thing, but there are small legal distinctions. In the process of doing that, we discovered that occasionally there were flights to Africa. And in the process of learning about that, we got in touch with people who had been on some of those flights. And a couple of those people, a few of those people, told us stories about being strapped into horrible devices that caused them great pain and suffering for many, many hours, that threatened their lives because some of them had a lot of trouble breathing in this apparatus. And one of the people in our group spent a lot of time talking to them and convincing them, asking them, and actually it didn't take much to convince them, telling them that they should bring this to light, that we need their help to let people in this country know about the way those ICE officers treated them. I mean, it included, you know, shooting them with rubber bullets, bending them over so that they can't breathe in this crazy apparatus called the wrap, which is something that was developed in order to calm patients, and is being used improperly by ICE as a restraint and torture device. These people spoke today, and it was harrowing to listen to these guys. They're using aliases because they're in trouble. They're worried about what's going to go on here, and they're in danger back in Africa where they've been returned to. Some of them are hiding out in third countries. They're terrified. And listening to them was it's hard to believe what we're willing to do. It may be, as one of them said, it may be that the darker the skin, the worse the treatment. And there seems to be some truth to that, suggested by the way we've been treating the Haitians, rounding them up and waving our lariats in the air, reminiscent of those guys who ran after runaway slaves. Pictures that just make me tremble. So we got to hear from them today. And let me go to your question about Title 42 and what that means. Title 42 is a ridiculous idea. Let's just, you know, come up with an example. We know that it was something that was brought up by Stephen Miller as a way to use the pandemic to stop people at the border without actually having to go through the motions that they were going through. It seemed like to the Trump administration and now to the Biden administration that you can actually bypass even the absurd withholding of rights that we saw under MPP, under Remain in Mexico, because those people got to apply for asylum. They got a chance to say, I want asylum because I am gay. I want asylum because I was politically active in a group. And
then they waited, and then they were waiting in Mexico. They weren't
And then they were waiting in
going all
Mexico.
the way back to another country across an ocean or.
Right. In this case, nobody even gets to say. So it makes it even more convenient. Right now, let's say Minnesota is having a surge of COVID. Should we apply Title 42 to Minnesota? Should we keep those people from crossing the border into North Dakota? I mean, it's a ridiculous idea. It doesn't control it. No reputable scientist believes that Title 42 should be applied in this way. Dr. Fauci, who we all like to think is the soul of our medical establishment at this point, says that thinking that immigrants are causing this thing is a crazy idea. It is a crazy idea, but it does give the Biden administration cover because everybody's afraid of catching this disease. So if you're not looking hard at this situation, if you're not looking critically at the situation, it works. It works for the Biden administration. And Mayorkas skips, like you say, from one thing to another. He knows it's not true, and it's very hard. Well, it's hard for people like us to lie. Maybe it's not so hard for politicians, but it's a lie that he has to tell whenever he's asked about this thing. He's lying. This is not about COVID. This is about getting people out as fast as we can so that people don't notice this. People who would sympathize don't see it, and people who hate immigrants for their own xenophobic reasons, for their own fear, because of their own fear, or that they're going to lose what little they have themselves, those people are not going to look hard at this and say that's not true. But it's not true.
And why do you think overall the anti-immigrant narrative is winning, won over Trump and now is being ignored in this country? And how do we change the narrative? Why does the simplistic immigrants are bad argument win over? And what can we do as humanitarians to combat that? I was talking about this with my producing team on my last call today. You know, what are the talking points that we can use? I mean, we have this huge labor shortage now, and yet our, top of our government is pushing back a huge pool of labor that we could probably use. Or how do we combat people from the xenophobic rhetoric that they've just been, bombarded with for so long? What do we do?
Well, I think we have to let people know who their real enemies are. This is a kind of a classic issue of the left. The powers that be, the people who control a lot of the money in this country and a lot of the industry in this country, benefit from dividing people who have an awful lot in common. We have a lot in common with the people that are coming across the border. We work for a living. Those of us who are still, we're not retired like myself, but we work for a living. We do things like that. We have a lot of the same interests. I think my father, who was a union leader, used to say the tactic was, let's you and him fight. So first we have to know who it is who it is our enemies are. In other words, if we're fighting with other people like ourselves, people with children, people with families, people who just want to live, if we fight with them, then we're not seeing where the real problem is. But your question is a little different. I gave you a kind of a class analysis, and I believe it's true. But your question is more like an advertising question. Like, how do you make them look good? How do you make them look good? Well, I don't know. You can lighten their skin. It's a kind of a horrible question in a way. How do we do that? How do we make people not suspect foreigners? There's something in the human, in human beings that knows that when you see people that you don't know, be cautious. And that's something that's being exploited. because we can learn very quickly, as you and I both have done by walking across that bridge, that these people are not people that we have to be afraid of. So we have to see, and how do we do that? I don't know. You know, it's like I say, it's an advertising question, and advertising was never my field.
All right, I'm going to work on that then with my team.
Good.
We're about a few minutes from taking questions, but there's a long article in Vox, I think it was today or yesterday, about, you know, sort of Biden's policy and his muddled immigration policy. And I didn't realize it, but it talks about Harold Koh, a senior State Department lawyer, resigned earlier this month after writing a scathing 3,000-word legal memo arguing Title 42 runs afoul of U.S. asylum law and longstanding international treaties, particularly in the way it is currently being used to return Haitians to dire humanitarian conditions in their home country. A quote is, "We all came into this administration to give the American people a government as good as our national values," the memo obtained by Politico reads. "I ask you to do everything in your power to revise this policy, especially as it affects Haitians, into one that is worthy of this nation we love." So there are people, like you said, there are good people. And then there are good people that leave in a government that does things contrary to their moral compass. Do we have enough, you know, I guess the question is, do we have enough people left inside the government? Because I don't know if it was because Bernie Sanders was pushing Joe Biden to the left during the campaign, but I have a clip that I'll be using in my documentary where Biden says, "If you need to come here, we welcome you," you know, which was completely untrue, as it turns out. So I think I'll stop there because I know there are a lot of people online with us today. And part of this fundraiser, again, this is a fundraiser for the Latin American Relief Fund. And we are raising money for what they do with the money is they help the ABBA shelter, which is a shelter in central Mexico that helps migrants on their way through Mexico. I got to visit it. It's also an established Red Cross area for amputees, which there are a lot of because of the harrowing journey a lot of them take aboard the trains. And hopefully we'll get to show you a little video of that at the end of our program today around the 4 o'clock hour. But now I think I'd like to ask Judith to come back on and field some questions for Joshua from the chats.
Okay, so we have one question from Cher, and that is, what do you believe is the difference between what you're describing, Joshua, and what Hitler did to the Jews and others during the Holocaust?
Well, you know, I mean, there obviously there are differences. We're not running extermination camps. We are certainly leading people in various ways to their death, but we're not. I think if I could answer the spirit of the question, it is horrible what we're doing, and there are parallels that are very, very disturbing to think about. There is that exact element, the way to treat outsiders, and the way that some people in society are willing to allow horrible things to happen to people who are the other, and that parallel with the Nazis is not lost on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that I found interesting was the other day I was reading an article about how Colombia has accepted over 1 million refugees from Venezuela, and the United States only accepts 125,000 asylum seekers and refugees per year. And in the last 5 years, you know, Colombia, a country the size of Colombia has accepted over 1 million refugees from Venezuela. So that was kind of shocking to me because we certainly can afford to take in more people. I'm also a little bit more hopeful than you are, Josh, because if you look at the long history of immigration in this country and when the doors have been thrown open, it's when we have severe labor shortages, and we are embarking on a severe labor shortage that I don't think is going to get any better, because I think a lot of people are dropping out of the workforce and don't have any intention to go back. And I think at some point, even the Republicans are going to be pressured to open the door to get more people. Here in Washington, we didn't have enough people to pick apples, to do a lot of the labor in the orchards, and all over the state. There's been a huge labor shortage here of the kind of labor that I think a lot of migrants have been doing traditionally. So I'm a little bit more hopeful that we're going to probably see the door swing open because of an economic need as much as anything else.
I think it's, I think you're probably right that it'll open a crack, or there'll be some method for allowing labor in. A lot of the solutions that get suggested from time to time that I don't feel very comfortable with have to do with temporary workers being allowed to come. That's something that people suggest from time to time. It's one of those things that there are a lot of people in the business community that support, because they can get temporary workers, pay them, below scale, and avoid benefits. But I think you're right that there are economic pressures to allow people in. I just don't know if they're going to be allowed in a way that's going to allow them to live decent lives.
Do we have any more questions from people? Josh, how did you start doing this work, doing witnessing at the border?
Yeah. Well, I was sitting actually in the room that I'm in right now, and I was watching the television, which you can't see. It's over that way. And I was watching MSNBC, and there was the news about the kids in cages at the Ursula Detention Center in McAllen. Now, I had spent time in my life in South Texas. It's an area where I kind of vagabonded around when I was young, and then later when I was in my working life, I had business in San Antonio and used to go down to the border every so often. So I was in a place that looked familiar to me, and looking at it on the screen there made me think, instead of sitting here stewing in this chair and thinking that I'm looking for something to throw at the screen, that I would get up and go down. And I went up and I went down to the Ursula Detention Center, which was the famous place where we saw the pictures of the kids in cages. And I parked myself in the front, and after a few days, I managed to get myself arrested there, hung around a little longer, went to a couple of demonstrations, and then went out to a place that I'd heard about where they were setting up tents and they put 400 boys in it, a place called Tornillo, just southeast of El Paso. I went there and I looked at it, and I didn't really know what I was seeing. I didn't really understand it. I looked, I used my binoculars a little bit. I walked around. I got chased off by local farmers, and I went home. But I was haunted. And a few weeks later, I went back to Tornillo, actually, I went back to El Paso for a meeting with some people there, and I said, what if I went to Tornillo and I just went there and sat there? And what if I found a way where I could just stay there and be a witness? And I was encouraged by some of the local people and local groups in El Paso, notably the Hope Water Institute. And I went down there and I managed to convince the county, which owned a toll plaza there, to let me put an RV on it. Told them that I was with a film company. I was trespassing in your business, Vicky. I pretended I was a filmmaker. I had an iPhone. I must have been a filmmaker, right?
You are. And I'll probably use some of your footage.
Very good. So I pulled in there, and I stayed there, and I spent a few months wrangling with the people that were there who didn't want me to be there, who didn't want me to see, and figuring out where I actually had a right to walk and where I actually had a right to be. And I got bolder, and I walked around back and I saw the kids and I exchanged some words with them, and I started writing. And I set up a group called Witness Tornillo, which the name of which is now Witness at the Border. I started writing and people started joining the group. And after a while, Congress people came, senators came. And they came and they stood out there and they joined in the effort to get the place closed. And it got closed. That's how I started.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much. That was a really moving story. I would like to show everybody our latest video that Victoria Bruce and Rebecca Eichler put together. And I think Rebecca has it ready to go now. And if people would like to, okay.
This is Albergue Aba, a migrant shelter in Celaya, a city in central Mexico. Albergue Aba sits at the crossroads of Mexico's rail line, a vital and lethal mode of transport for desperate migrants heading to the United States. Pastor Ignacio Martinez Ramirez, the director of Aba, has dedicated his life to helping migrants. Since opening its doors in 2015, Albergue Aba has offered meals, clothing, shelter, and medical care to over 35,000 men, women, and children, even children as young as 14 years old traveling alone. In 2021, the number of migrants arriving at the shelter has increased dramatically.
Son muchos logros los que hemos alcanzado en este año. Yo calculo que va a ser un porcentaje entre 12,000 personas que vamos a estar atendiendo.
Wow, so
va a aumentar
como 30%.
Así es, 30%, y vamos a poder apoyar ahora más mujeres y niños. Entonces están saliendo familias completamente enteras, ¿no?
Sí.
De su país.
The coronavirus pandemic has added another layer of uncertainty to the lives of migrants in transit. Aba is only one of 3 recognized shelters in all of Mexico that has been allowed to remain open during the pandemic, because in addition to providing safe shelter for migrants passing through Mexico, Aba provides care and rehabilitation for the migrants who have lost limbs falling from trains on their way to the U.S. border.
Bueno, necesitamos, por ejemplo, en estos momentos necesitamos un gimnasio para nuestros hermanos amputados que necesitan su rehabilitación.
We at the Latin American Relief Fund are determined to help every single human being who needs ABA's services. And we need your help. Your donation will help to ensure that Albergue ABA can continue to serve every migrant who arrives at their doors during the pandemic and beyond. Together, we can help preserve the dignity, safety, and human rights of those who are often forgotten.
So everybody, I think we're going to wrap up the program here, but I just want to thank Victoria and Joshua so much for coming in and enlightening us on what's happening at the border. As you can see, we're doing our part at LARF, at the Latin American Relief Fund, to raise money to keep ABA's services going. And there was a little mathematical error there. We have gone from 4,000 to 12,000 people arriving this year at ABA House, like 3 times, not 30% increase, but a 200% increase, 3 times the number of people are arriving. So now more than ever, we need your support, and we need you to spread the word amongst your friends and family and anyone you can reach out to help fund the $20,000 we're trying to raise before the end of this year in order to reach our goals of continuing to help ABA keep the doors open for every migrant who arrives there. So I thank you for your participation. It's been a great and very interesting and informative session, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you for the work you
Judith.
do. Thank you.